Krishna Prishnaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashatya Deshatarine Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama संकीर्तन की जय, श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय।
हरि हरि। Hare Krishna. Can you hear me, Ronnie Prabhu? I can't hear you.
I'm sorry, I was on mute. Hare Krishna. Now you are on mute.
How are you, Arzu Mataji?
Arzu Mataji is on mute.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, I am good. How are you?
बस ठीक है माताजी. All well. We are missing all your questions. कोई क्वेश्चन पूछने वाला नहीं है.
पूछूंगी प्रभुजी, अब पूछूंगी.
ठीक है. Office is okay. You are working from home.
Yes, yes. Now they've started.
Now they started.
Now we are going. Yes.
हरे कृष्ण. मीनाक्षी माताजी क्या खा रहे हैं? अकेले अकेले खा रहे हैं.
मैं कह रही थी प्रभु जी, आरजू माता जी के दर्शन हुए इतने दिनों बाद. वेरी नाइस, थैंक यू दर्शन देने के लिए.
नंदिता माता जी नहीं आपके साथ माता जी?
है उन्होंने भी ज्वाइन किया हुआ है अपने फोन से.
अच्छा, अलग से ज्वाइन किया हुआ है.
हाँ जी.
हाँ उधर है वो तुम्हारे साइड.
देखो
हम सबको बोल देते हैं कि अपनी अपनी वीडियो ऑन करो.
हरे कृष्णा प्रभु जी.
हरे कृष्ण माता जी.
कैसे हैं आप सब?
बस ठीक है माता जी.
गुड गुड, ठीक ही होना चाहिए.
हाँ.
प्रभु कृपा होनी चाहिए.
यस माता जी. आप लोग वो कोर्स अटेंड कर रहे हैं, आपको कैसा लग रहा है वो वैष्णव एटिकेट वाला कोर्स?
प्रभु जी अब ठीक लग रहा है.
हाँ जी.
अब अच्छा लग रहा है.
हाँ.
Easily understand कर पा
ठीक लग रहा है.
This is going live on Facebook.
ऐसे मूड में थी घर में.
प्रभु जी इस काम
लाइव है Facebook.
Where is he? Oh, yeah.
हरे कृष्णा प्रभु जी.
He is not connected the audio yet. He's not hearing.
Now is it connected?
No, we will have to ask. Maybe we can wait for 1 or 2 minutes, and then we will have to ask.
हरे कृष्णा प्रभु जी. धन्यवाद प्रणाम.
He's not able to hear too. Should I message him?
Wait प्रभु जी.
Okay.
उनको अनम्यूट कर दीजिए. लग गया ना.
Now he is muted. Hare Krishna Prabhu.
हरे कृष्णा. धन्यवाद प्रणाम.
Oh, yes.
You're on mute प्रभु जी.
Okay.
Yes प्रभु जी.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hare Krishna.
हरे कृष्णा प्रभु जी.
Hare Krishna.
How are you प्रभु जी?
Well, it's getting warmer.
Getting warmer. Yes.
Getting warmer here in Vrindavan. I'm sure there as well, huh?
Yes प्रभु जी.
Yes. Okay. So here we are Saturday again. We offer my respects. Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pastaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namane. Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pajanini Visesa Sanyavari Pasatata Desatana. Panchakopatir Bhaskri Pasindubhya Eva Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. So how is everyone this evening?
All well, Prabhuji, all excited to hear from you.
Oh, thank you, thank you. I'm always excited to see you. I appreciate always the opportunity to do a little service, being locked down like everyone here in Vrindavan. Today I was, you know, I'm not one for organization so much, but I was thinking today, speaking maybe Calcutta, Srila Prabhupada in Calcutta and Mayapur. Eventually it will go into Mayapur, but to get to Mayapur, you have to go through Calcutta.
Oh, wonderful, Prabhuji.
So the first time I traveled to Calcutta and Mayapur with Srila Prabhupada was in spring, March of 1972. So that was after Prabhupada came. He stayed here for almost 6 months. He came here in the middle of October to Vrindavan. And then after Vrindavan, he went, of course, to Hyderabad. In Vrindavan, he did his programs, Nectar of Devotion programs. Then he went to Hyderabad for a week, and there he did a, a festival. He did like a 7-day festival there. Then he went to Ahmedabad. He also did another Pandal festival there for a week. And then he went to Mumbai, and he did, that was his second Cross Maidan festival. And he spent some time there, of course, developing the Juhu project. So then gradually, he finally made it to Calcutta. We know Calcutta, of course, is Prabhupada's birthplace. So for him to go there was special in different ways. I'm sure some of you at least have been to the Albert Road Temple. The same temple is there now that was there in 1972. So the same temple is there. Radha Govinda deities are there that were installed there. And in the temple, Prabhupada's room is right next to the temple room. There's that nice big veranda out front that stretches across the temple room and Prabhupada's quarters. And again, for me, this was early on. This was in, like I say, it might have been March, could have been February. I would have to check the dates. But when he arrived there, so I was still new, even as being Prabhupada's servant, being with him for just a few months. And when we first got there, Prabhupada had a small room, his sitting room, and his bed was at the back of the sitting room. And when we arrived there, I remember that that afternoon, because Prabhupada, he would take a nap after lunch. So he rang his bell and he called me into the room. And he looked at me and he said what I thought was the most peculiar thing. And he looked and he said, "Does your nose work?" And I said, "What?" He said, does your nose work?" And I'm like, "Yes, it works." He said, "Do you snore?" And I said, "Oh, no, Prabhupada." I said, "I don't think so. I don't snore." He said, "Good." He said, "Because if your nose doesn't work," he said, "then you can't stay here." Because in Calcutta, my role, Prabhupada's room had French doors that opened out, 2 doors. They had glass panes, and of course, curtain was over it. So one of my services was when Prabhupada took rest in the afternoon, and even at nighttime, my service was to lie right in front of those doors so that no one could go in. So that was his first time he ever asked me that after being with him, because I was that close to his room. So he wanted to make sure that my nose was working properly, that I didn't snore. Prabhupada was very light sleeper, we would say. He could hear, if he heard a fan spinning in another room, he would tell you, "What is that noise?" Or if he heard a spigot, with the drops of water, he would call you in and say, "What is that noise? Stop that noise." So that was one of my first services, was to learn that I didn't, and at that time, I didn't snore. I picked it up later on in years, I think as many men do, at least, off and on. And then another time when I went in, because the one thing I saw, there were different levels. When Prabhupada was in the West, he was very much protected, in a sense, in his room, that he only had visitors when he desired them. If he met with the devotees in the temple, whether it was administrators, temple president, GBC, whatever it may be, it was at his request. And one of our services, of course, is in his entourage, was to keep him from too many guests coming, because always his business was translating. As he said, he always he would mention that if he did too much management, if he had to get too involved in management at the different temples and things, he said it would distract him from translating, which was most important. So sometimes even we would say more than over the top, we would not allow people to see Srila Prabhupada. I'm told that amongst Prabhupada's entourage and amongst his servants, I was one of the most generous in that regard. I had a way, even I would cook for Prabhupada, of course, and bring him his breakfast, bring him his lunch. But sometimes if there were other devotees around, I would say, would you like to bring Prabhupada's lunch to him? Bring his breakfast to him. If there were people that I knew, my godbrothers or something, then I would let them do it. So even that was considered special, because we very much protected him from different people just going in. But when we went to India, and I saw in Vrindavan how different things were, whether we were in Delhi or Vrindavan, Mumbai, wherever it was, it seemed that devotees got a lot of association with Srila Prabhupada, much more than I had seen outside of India. And I did get to understand it was a special gift that Prabhupada gave to the devotees in India, because it was such an austere place to stay in India, for the Westerners in particular, to do service in India in those days, whether it was Calcutta, Mayapur, Juhu, wherever it was, there was very little facility for the devotees. The rooms they stayed in, bathroom facilities, eating facilities, health facilities, everything was much more difficult than in the West. But the one thing that they did get in India was Prabhupada's association. And that, just that association, once or twice a year, whenever he was in these different places, was more than enough to make up for all the austerities that my godbrothers and godsisters were going through. So I saw that everywhere I went. But in Calcutta, it was a whole special sphere, because Calcutta was Prabhupada's home. So it was not just his disciples that he was giving association to, that were getting his darshan. There was a whole other range of people. There was his son would come at times, Vrindavan Day. There was his sister, of course, who she would come whenever she wanted, and loved Prabhupada so much, and loved his association so much, so she would come. But then there were other that were just, he had known over the years, just friends and acquaintances, who, now that he was back after all these years, and of course he was a successful Swami who had spread Krishna consciousness, Vedic culture all over the world, they were also coming to see him. But one day he called me in and he said, and it's kind of a quote, I think it was from Christianity, even from Jesus, that said, even a saintly person is not respected in their hometown. So Prabhupada felt that almost like a pressure to give so much of himself when he was in Calcutta. As much as he liked it there, he saw that it was a place where he had to give a lot of association. So that was one of the things in Calcutta. And of course, facility in Albert Road Temple was very bad. The temple, of course, was up on the first floor, you would say in India, and in US, we would say the second floor. So there was the ground floor, then there was the first floor. At that time, they were renting. So they just had that top section. So they had the temple and Prabhupada's room. And then when you went around the back, there was one bathroom. Prabhupada had his bathroom. And then there was one other bathroom. So before that bathroom, there was what was the men's ashram, like brahmachari ashram. There were brahmacharis stayed there. Sannyasis, Gargamuni Maharaj when he was there, and so many would come, Bhavananda when he was there, Tamal Krishna Maharaj when he was there. And then you would go through that bathroom, and then you would go up to another room, and that's where the ladies in the temple stayed. So it was very strange kind of facility and very austere facility for everyone. And the men and women had to share that one bathroom. I remember when I lived there with Prabhupada, I would go bathe across the street. And there was a tank across the street, a pond across the street, which also wasn't all that nice and all that clean, but it was better than using the bathroom. So Mangalarti time, some of us would go bathe in there in the morning just to avoid using this bathroom. And I was one of those. So anyway, Prabhupada, of course, he would go out on his morning walks and they would drive to different areas close by the temple. There were some nice parks. And Prabhupada mentioned, of course, when he was young, Calcutta was the crown jewel, he said, in India for the British Empire. They had developed Calcutta very nicely. There were many parks with these ponds in the center. It was said it was very, very beautiful. Of course, even when Prabhupada was there in the 70s with us, 71, 72, it had deteriorated by that time quite a bit. But he would go on these walks in these places in the morning. So one of these morning walks, when Prabhupada would go on his walk, and of course it generally was always the men. You'll see some places Prabhupada went on morning walks, like a Bhaktivedanta manor, when he would just go outside the manor. You would see men, you would see women. In Prabhupada on the morning walk with the brahmacharis and the sannyasis. You'll see that in Los Angeles, and going on the beach and going in the park there at different places. So Calcutta was like that. Prabhupada's walk was usually with 4 to 6 of the men who were there. Now there were ladies, half a dozen ladies at times, especially when Prabhupada was there, staying at the temple as well. Now they would stay upstairs in that room above the bathroom. And when Prabhupada was on his morning walk, of course, these ladies, they were doing all the services in the temple. The men's service generally at that time in India, when I was there, 71, 72, 73, it was always making life members. Prabhupada said in India, he said, the Harinam situation was not the way to attract people in India. He said, in fact, that just going out on Sankirtan, we wouldn't be taken seriously. There were so many people going out chanting for money, chanting for donations. So he said that wasn't to our advantage. And the method was, of course, these life membership programs. And at that time, life membership was 1,111 rupees. That was the figure. And that at that time, the dollar was like 7 rupees to $1. So it was not even $200 in exchange. And for that, all the life members, you would get a membership card saying you're a life you the ability to stay in any temple, ISKCON temple in the guest house, all around the world for 3 days for free. So it wasn't that difficult to sell these life memberships to the wealthier section in India. And also, of course, for that same amount of money, you got all of Prabhupada's books that were currently in print and all future books that were going to be printed. So it actually was quite an amazing deal that was promoted. So this is generally what the men were doing. So the women were, of course, taking care of the deities in Calcutta, unlike here in Vrindavan, where you just see men on the altar. And in many of the temples, the women were the pujaris. So there in Calcutta, one of the very early ones was Narayani, Mother Narayani. She was pujari there for almost 20 years. And of course, Palika was there when I was there. She was cooking. Sometimes Malati was there. So these different devotee ladies were there. So they would cook. They would prepare Prabhupada's breakfast, Prabhupada's lunch. They would clean the temple. They would do the pujari service. While Prabhupada was on the morning walk, all these activities were going on. But in the temple, there was a commotion. And of course, some of it was from the men there. They were disturbed that these women were staying in the temple. Prabhupada's disciples, ladies, were living in the temple because they found that it was just too difficult and that there wasn't proper division. And on this one morning walk in particular, I remember being with Prabhupada and one of the sannyasis, all through the morning walk, he kept saying, we have to, in the temple is very difficult, Prabhupada. We're having all this association with these women. It's not a good thing. We're celibate, we're sannyasis, we're brahmacharis. If the women are here, we have to share the bathroom. And he said, always we're getting associated in this closed quarters. And Prabhupada was interesting because sometimes he just listened. He wouldn't say anything. And this was one of those times. He just was quiet as this devotee went on. And it was obvious he was making a case. And his case was that we should find some facility for the women outside of the temple. But Prabhupada didn't respond on the walk. So this went on, and it went on for some time. And Prabhupada just had his hand, was chanting his japa. So finally, as it would be, the walk was over. Prabhupada gets into the car. We come back to the temple. And when you get back, parked outside on the street, and you have to go up those stairs. It's a long stairway, high ceiling. So it was many stairs up onto the first floor there, onto the veranda. So now Prabhupada's walking and I'm beside him. The devotees are all beside Prabhupada and he's still very quiet. And then he starts walking by the veranda, which means he's walking past the temple room and the doors are open. And everyone knows, all his disciples know, Prabhupada goes for the morning walk. You're always there. If you're not on the morning walk, you're going to watch Prabhupada as he gets into the car. You're going to give him flowers. You're going to give him flower garlands. You're going to offer obeisances. You're going to offer dandavats. So now when he comes back, it's the same thing. They know Prabhupada, after an hour, he's going to be coming back. So as he's at the veranda and he's passing the temple room, all the ladies in the temple are there, 4 to 6 ladies. So they all offer obeisances as soon as they see Prabhupada walking by the temple room. And Prabhupada stopped. Prabhupada wasn't one to just ignore or not notice, but he stopped and showed his smile. And then he looked at the ladies. Then he looked at the men, sannyasis and brahmacharis. And he had his cane. Prabhupada used his cane was his pointer many times. So then he just pointed with his cane and he said, if you associate with these ladies, you'll become Krishna conscious. And then he walked into his room. So that was the end of the discussion. That was his way of saying no. He gave shelter. Prabhupada took his disciple, he gave us shelter. This was this was something again there in Mayapur. And after the first year or two, they had the GBC meeting. We're small, just a dozen or so GBC. And they would come to Prabhupada afterwards, and they would tell Prabhupada the different resolutions that they had made at the meeting, and then would get final approval from him. So the one particular year, there was, this was all going on in the 70s, happened more than once, different arrangements for the ladies. The ladies were not always given the facility that they deserved and the respect that they deserved for doing service, just like the men were doing. But in particular, they were talking about women, what do you say, single parents. And these were ladies that had their children, but for one reason or another, they didn't have husbands. So they came in with this resolution proposal that the GBC, the chairman, presented to Prabhupada, saying that these ladies shouldn't be staying in the temple because, again, they're just a disturbance to the men. And they mentioned it to Prabhupada, of course, and he became very disturbed. And he just said, wanted to give protection to everyone. He said, ladies with children, ladies without children, to the children, to everyone. And this was what Prabhupada's society, his ISKCON society, was to give protection. It's still the same. It was to give protection to all the devotees. He said, anyone that would come, whether it be on the farms, he said that now for the farms, anyone ready to come and work on the farm, he said, you give them facility, you give them prasadam, they chant Hare Krishna, and they can stay. But Prabhupada was never one to refuse shelter for someone that wanted to take shelter in Krishna consciousness. So when he heard that in particular, he just showed his compassion, his eyes teared up, and he just thought in that way that he said, this is our business, to give shelter. So also in Calcutta, I see Ekanath Prabhu is here. He was at least showed he was watching. He was there at that time. That's where I first met him, in Calcutta. He would know many of those things. And as Prabhupada had his room just next to the temple room, and Mangal Artik, Prabhupada was up. We know he didn't go to Mangal Artik, nor was I. My service was going to Mangal Artik. I always had to be next to Prabhupada's room so that I could hear him ringing the bell if he needed me. But because it was so simple and so convenient, there were times when Prabhupada would, in Calcutta, he would just, during Mangal Artik, he would wait a bit, and when everyone was settled, the chanting was going on, he would come and just stand in the back. He would stand on the veranda, or we'd go just inside and stand on the back, and he would also attend part of Mangal Artik. Prabhupada was always very aware. Prabhupada didn't miss much. He didn't miss anything. He always knew. Imagine there could be a dozen or more people in the temple room. Could be 20 devotees in the temple room. So one day he's there at Mangal Artik, and the next day he goes to Mangal Artik, and he goes up to one of the men and he taps him on the shoulder. And he said, where were you yesterday? So Prabhupada knew he was there today, he wasn't there yesterday. This was Prabhupada's observation ability. You may think he's just walking around chanting on his beads, and he's just, everything's very casual, nonchalant, but he sees, he knows what everyone is doing. These are his disciples. These are his charge. This is his duty, is to see that we're all following the best possible way. So he tapped this devotee and he said, where were you yesterday? And of course, the devotee had a very good answer, he thought. And he said, oh, Prabhupada, he said, I went to your house yesterday for Mangal Arti. And I attended there and saw your deities there. He said, I was at your home. And Prabhupada just looked. He said, this is your home. He said, not going there. He said, this is your home, this temple. So he made it very clear what he wanted for us. And I'm being with him for a long time. I was, I got to see this over and over again. Sometimes some of Prabhupada's disciples were ISKCON in general, and Prabhupada's disciples were called fanatics. We can say we were fanatics because we're very closed-minded and don't wander around, don't do things. We don't see things equally. All these devotees, all these different mats, and all this. But it was clear to me when Prabhupada was here, he was very much fanatic with his disciples in that he wanted them in his temples. He created the temples for his disciples. And it was never more clear than where I am here now in Vrindavan at Krishna Balaram Mandir. As this was, of course, even when Prabhupada was here, devotees, they started going to this place and that place to take darshan of the deities. Prabhupada himself, well, on the morning walk, Prabhupada just walked basically. He didn't go into temples during his morning walk. But even within his entourage, sometimes his secretary, he wouldn't be there. His secretary here, and this is after the temple, Krishna Balaram Mandir was here. And Prabhupada called for his secretary, but he was out. He was out taking darshan, going to some of the temples in Vrindavan. So then when he came back, Prabhupada in his way, he called him in. He said, where were you? He said, oh, Prabhupada, I went to this temple, I went to that temple, I was taking darshan. And Prabhupada said, I placed all the holy places, all the tirthas of Vrindavan, he said, are in the courtyard of Krishna Balaram temple. He said, you don't need to go to other places. And his Sanskrit editor, we may know one of his Sanskrit editors that later on asked Prabhupada to find him if he could suggest who he could take as guru. Prabhupada talked about that later on. He said, just see. He's saying, I'm bogus guru. He wants to find guru. Who can I have as a guru? He said, just see the rascaldom. He doesn't want me as guru, but he's going to ask me, you're a bogus guru. You please tell me who is a guru that I can learn from. He said, such a rascal. But before he came to that point, he complained to Prabhupada and he said, these classes, these devotees giving classes, he said that not very good classes, not qualified. And Prabhupada's response was, well, still you don't go outside to hear from others. He said, if the classes aren't good enough, he said, then you give the classes. He said, that's what you can do. He said, not that you go outside. So Prabhupada was always very protective of his disciples. We know he made all his temples here in India, his three main centers, he gave them all a designation so that we would be attracted to stay in those temples. He said Juhu was his place of worship, Vrindavan was his home. So in doing that, he set these centers up to be important tirthas for his disciples. And he wanted his disciples to come to these places, particularly Mayapur and Vrindavan for Kartik and for Gaur Purnima festivals. He said to hear from the advanced devotees in these places, meaning himself and his disciples, and then go back to do preaching work. So this is how he trained us up while he was here. He was definitely, he was very single-minded in what he wanted us to do. He didn't like seeing us going to other places to learn things. He wanted us to learn from him. As he told Jayapataka in Mayapur, he said to him, when he was out at one of his godbrothers' mats, and he came back, and Prabhupada said, "Why are you going?" He said, "I'm the guru." What did he say? "I'm the guru.
I'm the guru of America.
I'm the guru of the Americans." He said, "They're not the guru of the Americans." He said, "I'm guru of the Americans." He said, "But if you go there, people coming there, they're going to think that they're your guru." So Prabhupada was very protected, and he is the one that did the work. So then later on, Jayapataka went and said, "Well, I told them," he said, "I spoke and I described your activities and what you had done and how you had spread Krishna consciousness all around the world." And Prabhupada said, that's all right. But nonetheless, he wanted us, he was our guru. There was no question of facilitating so many other centers. Huh? Anyway, so back to Calcutta. So in Calcutta, there were, of course, in Calcutta, his family was there. I saw his son a few times comes, Vrindavan. They always spoke in Bengali, of course, and I would leave the room whenever he came. But then one of his most frequent visitors was his sister, Pishima. Pishima, you all know, Pishima means auntie. We called her Auntie Pishima. Her name was Babatarini. And I remember when I first saw her at that time in the spring of '72. And it was, of course, shocking because there was this person that looked like Prabhupada, but she was about much shorter and a little rounder than Prabhupada. She had the same black glasses that Prabhupada would wear when he would give class, but she definitely could see that she was Prabhupada's sister. And she had a great love for Srila Prabhupada. She would come just like we would. She would come into his room and she would get down on her hands and knees, offer obeisances. I was just reading something there. Sorry for that. And then she would just sit down and listen. Prabhupada, of course, always would speak in English. Even she was present, he would speak in English to his disciples. Again, giving them association. The only thing that they got in India that kept them there was Prabhupada's association. But she would sit and just listen to Srila Prabhupada. She just wanted to be around her big brother. Prabhupada described sometimes, even when he was young, he talked about his younger sister, Pishima. And he said, amongst my family, my brothers and sisters, Pishima and I, we wanted to be devotees. He said, we were the only two. He said, our only concern was we wanted to be devotees. We didn't care about living a long time. We didn't care about having money. He said, we just wanted to be devotees. He said, my brothers, they wanted to live long life and make a lot of money. And then he laughed. He said, of course, neither they lived a long time nor they made a lot of money. He said, me and my sister, we've had very nice long life. He said, as devotees, he said, and I have so much money, he said. So everything, they had Krishna and they had long life. And of course, Prabhupada had society all around the world. He said, and his sister, it seemed like even from a young age, Prabhupada was always the big brother. He was her big brother. He said, when we were young, he said sometimes Prabhupada said he would fly kites. They would go up on the roof of the house, he said, and they would run back and forth on the roof. And she would be there. Of course, Prabhupada had the kite and she would be with him. He said, and if the kite wouldn't fly, he would tell his sister, his little sister, pray to Krishna. He said, pray to Krishna, make the kite fly. in one letter to Tamal Krishna Maharaj, which he asked about Nitya Siddha and Sadhana Siddha. And Prabhupada said there's no difference. He said how once one becomes devotees. He said, but regardless, he said, I can tell you within this life, there was never a time I did not remember Krishna. And he said, he told me in his room while we were there in Calcutta, he said, I remember being in my sister's arms. And I can remember her holding me, obviously this was older sister, holding me in her arms. So this was Prabhupada's consciousness, his memory, and of course his purity. He said, so never was there a time, he said, I didn't. And he said, within this life, he said, although I had so many opportunities, I never committed any sinful activities. So he expressed in his humble way how his lifestyle. Also on the walks, of course, when we would go to the different places for the morning walk, sometimes Prabhupada would point out different things. So of course, the one time he pointed out his school, the one school he attended, not sure if it was high school, but later on, and there was the field. They say in England, they call it the pitch, football pitch. We would say soccer field in America, but it was the football pitch. And Paramahamsa and I were in the car with Prabhupada, and as we passed by, Prabhupada said, do you see this field? He said, we would play football on the field. He said, I also was on the team. And then he laughed. He said, I was the goalie. He said, because I didn't like to run around. He said, so I was the goalie. So this was being with Prabhupada in his home city, how he would tell us different things about his lifestyle there. His sister, she was very special. She was a wonderful devotee, and she loved all of Prabhupada's disciples, most all of them. She didn't care for me very much because Prabhupada told me that she could not come and go whenever she wanted. So sometimes she would come to the temple and I would try to stop her from seeing Prabhupada if it wasn't a good time, if he was taking rest. She didn't care if he was resting. She was Prabhupada's little sister. She just wanted to be with him. She adored him. She would come to the temple in the morning, sometimes around breakfast time, and she would bring, first time I ever had, she would bring the clay pots with misti dahi. So that was the first time I had first class misti dahi. We would say it was to die for, it was so good. And she would bring sweets from Keshi Das. That was the recognized sweet wala. You would get all the sweets, rasgula, rasmalai, sandesh, so many kinds of wonderful sandesh. And she would bring them and distribute to the devotees, the Prabhupada's disciples. And she also carried a little bottle with Ganga Jal. She had Ganga Jal in the bottle. And whenever she would see us, she would put the holy water, she would put the Ganga Jal on the devotees. And she also would come to the temple with another bottle. The bottle was mustard oil. Of course, we know in Bengal, they like mustard oil. So we never had, I was the only person that ever had mustard oil. I traveled around the world with mustard oil for Prabhupada's massage. But it was never in the kitchens in any of the ISKCON centers. We only had ghee. Everything was cooked. If there was any type of oil needed, it was always ghee. To make the chaunces, there was ghee. We made halavas with butter. Everything deep fried was deep fried in ghee. That was the standard Prabhupada created. But she would come into the temple with a bottle of mustard oil because she would cook for Prabhupada sometimes. When she would come, she would like to cook. Prabhupada said she was first-class cook. Once Tamal Krishna Maharaj, he went in the room to Srila Prabhupada. Tamal Krishna Maharaj, he was very particular about prasadam. And he went into Prabhupada and he said, Prabhupada, don't you say that mustard oil, that oil's for the outside of the body and ghee is for the inside of the body? And Prabhupada said, yes. He said, yes. He said, then why here? He said, everyone cooks in mustard oil. Prabhupada said, oh, he said, it's very in mustard oil. Nor did I cook in mustard oil for Srila Prabhupada, although some people did, especially if they made shukta. That. But in Calcutta, when I was there for some time, I'm reading the statements there, I'm sorry. So we would cook Prabhupada's lunch. And Pishima, she would cook lunch for Prabhupada. So every day, this went on for a few days, I would come from the kitchen and I would bring what we cooked as rice, chapatis, dal, a few sabjis, everything made in ghee. And I would bring that in and put it down on the table. Then I'd go back into the kitchen and I'd get the preparations that Pishima made. And I'd bring that back and put it on Prabhupada's table. So I did this one day, then I did it another day. So then came the third day. If you hear me speak enough, you'll always hear about the threes. So the third day came. So I took in what we prepared. Now I have Pishima's plate. And I'm coming up and I get right to the French doors and I got Prabhupada's plate with Pishima. And as soon as I got to the doorway, Prabhupada looked at me and he got, don't bring that in here. He said, my sister, she's trying to kill me. He looked at me, he said, you eat it. Of course, there was no question I was going to eat. I said, Prabhupada, I said, I can't eat it. I said, I already don't feel well. He said, well, distribute it to the devotees. He said, she's trying to poison me with this, he said. But Prabhupada liked it, but it wasn't so easy to digest. See it? And Pishima made first-class khichdi. Everything she made was first class. She was expert. Jamuna described how it wasn't just mustard oil. There were certain varieties of mustard oils you use. Some you could only use for the outside of the body. There were certain ones you use for certain preparations. So she was expert. But then another time, was also right around that time, she had made Prabhupada some coconut kachoris. And these were also fried in mustard oil. And anyway, Prabhupada ate these kachoris. They were very tasty. But later on that night, he became very, very ill. And he had severe cramps, stomach pains. So much so, I was outside his doors from his room and I could just hear him moaning in his room. So finally I went in and I was just giving him massaging his stomach like that. And again, he said, my sister, he said, she's trying to kill me. He said, those coconut kachoris, he said, has created havoc. That was what the word he used, havoc. He said, has created havoc in my stomach. So she would come regularly when Prabhupada was there. And after a few days, there was one day, it was just before lunch, I would give Prabhupada massage on the veranda outside his room because the sunlight would come in. Prabhupada liked to get the morning sunlight. Very good for you, good for the immune system, have sunlight. So he would take his massage that way. So we would be alone, there would be no one around, and I'm behind him, I'm massaging him and massaging his back. And he just started laughing. and he said, do you know eating? And I just smiled and started laughing a little bit. And I said, no, Prabhupada. I said, I don't think it's possible. And I already knew he was talking about his sister. He said, yes. He said, well, my sister, he said, she's so fat. He said, and I tell her that you're so fat. And she says, but I hardly eat anything. And she said, and I don't feel good. And he said, well, if you don't feel good, he said, don't eat so much. But she tells me she's hardly eating anything. He said, but she's so fat. He said, is there such a case of someone getting fat without eating? And he's laughing as he's saying it. And I said, no, Prabhupada. I said, not that I know of. I said, I don't think that's possible. He said, I don't think so either. He said, but she insists that she hardly eats. So then we continued with the massage. So that was around noontime. So Prabhupada took his lunch, took his nap. Afternoon comes. So it's around 6 p.m. Every evening in his room, he's having open darshan, all the devotees. Everyone can come and sit and just talk with the devotees about so many different things. He just gave himself in that way. Everyone would be in ecstasy just sitting with Prabhupada in his room. So we're sitting there and Prabhupada's talking, and then his sister comes into the room. Just a small room, you know, if you've been there, it's just a small room. There were about 8 of us in the room. And then his sister comes in. So she goes past Prabhupada and she offers obeisances in front of Prabhupada. It takes her a minute to get down, offer her obeisances, and she sits up. And she just sat in the corner, the far corner of the room. And she's smiling. She's with her big brother. And then Prabhupada looks at her and he starts saying the same thing he said to me during the massage. He said, just see my sister. Just see how fat she is. All the devotees just start laughing and laughing. And of course, Prabhupada's laughing, the devotees are laughing, and Pishima's laughing. She doesn't understand anything he's saying. And then he went on. He said, and she says she hardly eats. So then he started describing the whole story again to all his disciples. Everyone was laughing and laughing, and Pishima was laughing. But Prabhupada was a big brother, and he had his little sister, and he dealt with his little sister like a little sister sometimes. But it was to everyone's. It wasn't mean. It was very funny, and for the devotees there in Calcutta, it was their life and soul. Prabhupada was all our life and soul, and he was Pishima's life and soul. We know when he went to Vrindavan, the devotee girls, they arranged to bring her to Vrindavan. She just always wanted to be around Prabhupada. She had such love for him and respect for him. And whatever she could do, she wanted to be around him. So that was Pishima. But Prabhupada was very funny. And it was always one of the qualities I appreciated most about Srila Prabhupada was his sense of humor, how he could laugh and he could make us laugh as well. And that laughter was the most wonderful thing to be able to laugh with Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna. So were there any questions here? We have some time. Hand out. Giant samosas. Yes. Ekanath, you should get on and say a few words about Pishima. You know her better than me. One of the things, of course, she would bring, and Prabhupada would distribute these sweets. We would get the box of sweets from K.C. Das. One of the things always happened when someone came in Prabhupada's room, you got prasadam. There was no leaving his room without prasadam. That was necessity. So they would bring these sweets in every day. Now, just like here in Vrindavan, everywhere in India, you live inside, you live outside, you have creatures. You have the geckos, you have ants, you have mosquitoes. They're inside as much as they're outside. So one day, I was a young brahmachari, and I went in, I offered obeisances in Prabhupada's room, and I saw all the suites. They were covered with ants. And of course, I saw it was an opportunity. And I said, thinking Prabhupada would say, yes, take them away. So I said, Prabhupada, these suites are covered with ants. And he just looked at me, knowing what a nonsense I was, and said, they don't eat very much. I said, no, Prabhupada. He said, so you go into the kitchen, he said, and come back with the thali. He said, a thali and a katuri. So I went into the kitchen and I got thali and a katuri. So he said, now you can shoo all the ants away. He said, and you fill up the thali with water. He said, and you put the katuri upside down in the center. He said, now you put the box of sweets on top of the katuri. He said, and problem is solved. So he didn't let me have any of the sweets. Yes. So do we have any questions? Let me see. He said,
Krishna devotees, do we have any questions from Prabhuji? Such sweet katha. Prabhuji, I just wanted to request you to please repeat that statement you made, that Prabhupada said that I brought all the tirthas in Krishna Balaram temple. Can you please repeat what he said?
Within all the tirthas, yes. There's a quote. I think it's in, it was Tamal Krishna Maharaj who was out when Prabhupada called for him. So when he came back, he told him that he said, I brought all the tirthas into the courtyard of Krishna Balaram Mandir. You can find that, I believe, in one of the Vrindavan books. Yes, within the compound of Krishna Balaram temple. So he liked very much his disciples to maintain that the temple, Krishna Balaram Mandir, that was the temple he provided, not just for pilgrims coming, but for his disciples, his place to go. So we come here, we're very happy. Being locked down, our only regret in being locked down is that we can't go to the Krishna Balaram Mandir for the last many weeks now, over a month. Otherwise, when I come to Vrindavan, it's usually the only temple. I could be here for 2 months, and the only temple I go to is Krishna Balaram Mandir. Otherwise, we'll go to Govardhan. I had to do parikrama around Govardhan. And generally, I go to Govardhan when I'm invited to give class about Srila Prabhupada. But I'm a fanatic. I admit I'm a fanatic, Prabhupada fanatic, and yes.
Thank you so much, Prabhuji. I think many devotees who joined, I think Devi Shakti Mataji also was telling so many devotees, they never went outside Krishna Balaram temple for years and years.
Yes, yes. Yes, it's most important. This is Prabhupada's home, and not only is it his home, his samadhi is here. Very amazing to be in Prabhupada's samadhi. You can feel his presence. Everyone, all of Prabhupada's followers, it's not limited to his direct initiated disciples, but anyone comes here, anywhere you can feel Prabhupada's presence if you follow his instructions and you realize everything is personal. But here in particular, it's very easy to go into samadhi in the morning, to go into his room and chant japa. His presence there is so strong. It's where he left, in his room there in the bed in 1977. So for me it is also my home. Initially I joined. I was in New Vrindavan for some months. Then Kirtanananda took me on the road show. Then I joined Prabhupada. Then I spent a few years in Hawaii, 3-4 years in Hawaii temple. So I considered that a home. Recently, I was there for 5 years, helping out in the temple. But to me, this is my home. Vrindavan, it's my home. I remember Prabhupada in so many different ways in this temple here. So I'm very happy to be here. I have my servant quarters in Prabhupada's rooms, so I go back and I can meditate on that. Yeah. So I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you, Prabhu. Yes, Arzu Mataji, you have a question? Go ahead, Arzu Mataji.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
Dandan Pranam. I have a question. I want to know what was Srila Prabhupada's perspective on Krishna. As in, he was so enthusiastic towards getting up on time, towards doing Manglarti, towards preaching, chanting, and even motivating others also, other disciples. I mean, what was his mood? And I mean, how come he had so much of energy? What was his perspective of Krishna that drove him towards doing so much?
Well, as a, you know, pure Vaishnava, a Vaishnava wants to eliminate everyone's suffering in the material world. They say the only anxiety Vaishnava has is seeing everyone in this world suffering, because they're all part and parcel of Krishna. They see everyone belongs to Krishna, and everyone can only be happy by serving Krishna. So Prabhupada very much carried that compassion within him. And I say, you know, one thing, again, Ekanath here with the archives, it's a very wonderful thing to be able to listen to Prabhupada's lectures, to hear his audios. We've been here every day now. We've been listening to Nectar Devotion classes, first in Vrindavan, and then as Prabhupada traveled, he continued to do the Nectar Devotion classes. Hearing what we hear, but even now when I listen, I always say, I hear two things are very prominent for me when I hear, and it's one is the sound of Prabhupada's urgency when he speaks. He speaks with an urgency, how important it is to take up this process for everyone. He speaks in a way that every class he gives, he feels like it could be his last class, and he's just begging us to take up this Krishna conscious process seriously within this lifetime, finish our business. The other thing that I sense is just the love he has for Krishna. It's all he talks about. And that's the sign, right? When you love someone, they're always on your mind. As Prabhupada would say, if you love someone, you always want to do things for them. You want to cook for them. You're always meditating on them. You always want to make everything comfortable for them. It's an addiction. It's an obsession. So Prabhupada was obsessed with Krishna. It wasn't having, like he said initially, he said, we chant our 16 rounds. It's an order, and we take initiation. It's an order there to chant 16 rounds. He said, but gradually it should become more eager to chant rounds. Not that we have to finish our 16 rounds and take a deep breath and we completed it, but he just wanted to chant. Prabhupada would chant anytime. He chanted very quietly on his beads, his japa. It was very soft. He could chant in the car. He could chant on the airplane in his seat. It wasn't that everybody around him was wondering what he was saying because no one was hearing. He would chant very quietly. But he was very happy in any situation. Sometimes different delays would be there. He could just sit and chant. He was very regulated. Of course, like I said, I didn't go to Mangal Artik when I was with him. He was translating usually that time of the day, anytime from midnight on, 1 o'clock into 4, 5 o'clock in the morning. He would off and on, he could do his translating work. And then of course his morning walk. After his morning walk, right into the temple room, we'd have class, we would do our Guru Puja, then he would have his breakfast. Then after breakfast, there could be some meetings with the secretary, mail, that would go right into the massage. So every day, wherever he was very regulated. In the afternoon, he, after his nap in the afternoon, which was just maybe half an hour at the most, that was a time he would read his books, just like he told us to read his books. It was one of the things that I found so, it To me, it was amazing when I first became his servant that I saw him sitting reading his books. And he even said that on the plane one day to myself in Prajumna. He was reading his Bhagavad Gita as it is. And he looked at us and he said, "What author do you know reads his own books after he's completed them?" And it was a rhetorical question. And of course, we would say nothing and he would say none. He said, once they finish a book, they never look at it again. They go on to the next book. He says, once they finish a book, they don't want to look at it anymore. He said, it's finished. He said, but I'm reading this Bhagavad Gita. Why? So again, we're just waiting for him to tell the answer. And he said, these are not my words. He said, these are Krishna's words. Another thing we know he said, different occasions. He would say he's surprised. He would read his books. He would read his books with surprise at how amazing they were, how beautiful they were, because they were Krishna's words. So he was, you know, in a way, of course, we don't imitate, but we just want to become devotees like Prabhupada. He was a devotee. The thing I liked so much about Prabhupada was not seeing him in the temple room giving classes, being the acharya, being the spiritual master of thousands of disciples. It was when he went into his room and closed the door behind him. He was a devotee of Krishna. He just loved Krishna and loved absorbing himself in Krishna conscious activities, reading and chanting, doing bhajans, and just sitting down, and he could talk so peacefully. So that was Prabhupada. But his mission was there from his spiritual master, and that was his life and soul, was to spread Krishna consciousness, especially in the West, to the English-speaking world. So he took that as his life and soul, and he was successful because he was perfect in following the instruction and giving the instructions just as he had heard it, without changing, without adulterating anything. He gave it, and with that he was successful. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Right.
Just few days back only, Prabhuji, we heard from a letter Prabhupada wrote to Rupanagara, and he wrote, these are not ordinary books. It is recorded chanting. Anyone who reads, he is hearing. You know?
Yes.
Very, very wonderful to see the potential.
He said, Bhagavad Gita, he said, Krishna is speaking to each one of us, not that he's just speaking to Arjuna. So it's very personal. Everything we read from Srila Prabhupada, he speaks. And you'll hear so many times devotees would say in classes, when they attended Prabhupada's classes, so many devotees always felt that Prabhupada was speaking directly to them. And of course he was. And he had that ability to be so personal, to look directly at people. As I said the other day, he never made anyone feel like they were an inconvenience to him, that they were taking too much of his time. He would give you everything when you were in his presence. He would give all attention to you for as long as we wanted it. And of course, devotees would go before Prabhupada, sometimes for very specific reasons, to try to solve different problems they had in their mind or something. But as soon as they came before him, all your troubles would disappear. So when he would say, how are you? You would say, fine, Prabhupada, everything is fine, because in his presence, you would immediately understand that everything else was trivial. You could immediately sense that none of these things mattered because it was all material. There's, I think, a question here. Someone chanting during the Bhagavatam class or kirtan, is this okay to chant while classes or kirtan? That's a good question. No, when Prabhupada was giving classes, I don't think anyone had their hand in their bead bag at that time. It's not a very respectful thing to do. You see someone giving class and you have your hand in your in your bead bag, because then you're neither listening to the class nor listening to your japa, I would say. Yeah. That's a practical thing.
Yes.
Although we do see it happening. Even at kirtan as well, yes. If you want to be at kirtan, you go to kirtan. I know when I'm doing the artik, because sometimes even at the artik, the Guru Puja, you'll see Prabhupada's hand in his bead bag, and the first thing I do is always take his bead bag off of his hands and put it beside him, because Guru Puja is going on. So, and if he's giving class, he's giving class. He's not, his hand is not in his bead bag during class. So these are, yes. I would say that, yes, we should, what we're doing, that's what we should do. Our full attention is there. And Prabhupada definitely wanted your full attention during class. And that was not just for himself. And I saw when I would find it, again, fascinating, you know, Prabhupada, when he would give Bhagavatam class and the different devotees would chant the verse, Prabhupada would chant in response just like everyone else. He was one of the devotees. You mentioned Rupanuga Prabhu. He has one story, you may know it, is a very famous story, when they were all in the airport and all the devotees were sitting down, many on the floor, some in chairs, and many of the devotees were going on the flight. And so Rupanuga, he was, of course, you know, senior devotee, he was GBC at times, and he said all the devotees should get up and get in line, you know, the flight is about to take off. So of course, Prabhupada heard him, and Prabhupada also got up to get into line, and Rupanuga said, no, Prabhupada, you can sit down, not you. And Prabhupada said, I'm not a devotee. He said, so Prabhupada, again, is one of the things I like so much about Prabhupada. He was, despite who he was and what he did, and the most powerful person on the planet distributing Krishna consciousness all around the world, he allowed us to see him. He allowed me, I would see him. He was very simple. He was childlike. You know, again, when he would go into his room, there was an innocent person, just devotee of Krishna that was very sweet, not childish. He was childlike. There was a very sweet innocence about him that attracted me more than anything, how he could be like that. One time, it was in Hawaii temple. He has a very beautiful sitting room in Hawaii. There's windows on 3 sides, so you have what are called trade winds, will always be blowing through, the curtains would be blowing. And he had a little single bed. So after lunch, it was myself and Guru Kripa, we were in Prabhupada's room, and he was getting to take rest. So he would just talk, and then he went and he sat in the bed, and he was still talking to us. And then he put his legs out, and he was still sitting up talking to us. And then all of a sudden, he just laid down, he grabbed the covers and pulled them over his head, just all in one motion, just like a child, you know. And Guru Kripa and I, we just looked at each other and just shook our heads, offered our obeisances, and left the room. So he would just do things that were just so simple, but so beautiful. Everything he did was beautiful.
J.K. Das Prabhu, you have a question?
And somebody said we should be able to go to the temple. Yes, we should be able to go to the temple. We're not even allowed outside of we're living in MVT. The temple is closed, not by temple authorities, it's closed by the government. No one is allowed. There's people that live in the temple compound, in the Gurukula building, and the guest house. They're the only ones that can go to the temple. Oh, thank you. Prabhu. He likes my kurta. Thank you, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Yes.
My name is J.K. Das. I'm calling from Faridabad. 2 years back, you came at Faridabad. 2 years back, you came at Faridabad.
Yes, yes, yes.
Your book was inaugurated, launched. What is the difficulty?
Yes.
My question is that, Prabhuji, that Kolkata ISKCON temple, Albert Road temple that you were talking of, is the first temple in India? Is the first temple in India?
Are you asking me?
Yes, yes, Prabhuji. Is it the first step?
Ekanath, do you know the answer to that question? It's certain. I would say it was the first temple. There was no temple no set temple in Delhi. There was no temple in Vrindavan. There was no temple in Mayapur. So yeah, I would say it was the first temple. It was a rented facility that finally was bought some years ago. They upstairs, downstairs, they built a guest house. So it could be, yes, what was the first official temple that was
in India.
Yes, yes.
In India.
That sounds reasonable.
Okay.
In Delhi, it took a long time for there to be a temple. Of course, here in Vrindavan, it was 1975, and Juhu, they put the deities in that little area. But Albert Road Temple was already there as well. Even you could call it, wasn't much of a temple. It was just a room for the deities with a little platform for the devotees to stand on. And Mayapur, of course, the Lotus building came after 1973, early 1974.
And Prabhuji used to cook for Srila Prabhupada for a long time, as you were the personal assistant to Srila Prabhupada. So I have heard that today also and other days also that you state cook the food and you offer to Srila Prabhupada. So generally we offer to Lord and then we take. So what is the system of prasadam? Just to explain.
My system was, again, there were different things. Earlier, I heard Govinda Dasi, when she was cooking for Prabhupada, he had deities. So she said she would offer to Prabhupada's deities. Of course, when she offered to Prabhupada's deities, she offered to Prabhupada. That was the system we learned. It was up through the disciplic succession. Now, when I was Prabhupada's servant, no one ever said to me, but my understanding and what I did from the first day, I would cook everything. Prabhupada would go bathe, dress, say, put on tilak and say Gayatri. So I had about 20 minutes. Of course, the cooker was on the stove the whole time I was giving massage, so everything was ready for chancing. Chapati dough was made. So I would, while Prabhupada was bathing and dressing and chanting Gayatri, I would prepare his plate, chance the vegetables, prepare his plate, make a chapati, put the rice on, and I would go into his room and put it down on the table and offer it to him by putting it down on the table. And then I would offer my obeisances and leave the room and go back and forth with chapatis one at a time. So that there was no question. The only person to offer to was Prabhupada, and he was right there. There's one story. This was before I was a servant. Prabhupada was in India, and I believe he was traveling from Vrindavan to Delhi, Delhi to Vrindavan on a train. And in those days, even more so than now, of course, every stop, every station, there were already so many people preparing so many things, kachoris, samosas, jalebis, sweets, everything. Whenever the train would stop for a few minutes, people would get off and they would buy things. So at one of these stops here, Prabhupada was familiar with, and he told the devotee, he said, you can go get kachoris from this one particular wala. So the devotee went and he got them, then he came back onto the train. And of course, then the train started up again to go to the next stop. So the devotee, they were sitting down, you have the tables in between the seats. So the devotee cleaned the area. Then he put down the kachoris on the plate. And then he proceeded to go kneel down on the floor And Prabhupada said, what are you doing? He said, well, Prabhupada, I'm offering the kachoris. Prabhupada said, I'm right here. So that was my understanding. Prabhupada was right there. There was no question. When we offer, all we're doing is like I would do here. If I'm offering something to the deity, I offer to Prabhupada. So I always say that personal servant, you're a pujari, and your spiritual master. But when he's physically present, he's right there, he's moving around. You have to follow him around as a pujari, not that he's just stationary. So I'm just like here, we have Dharmatma, they prepare lunch for Prabhupada every day. They bring it to Prabhupada's room. Then you get down and they offer the prayers. And they offer 3 times, 3 times, 3 times. But he was present right before me. There was another occasion in Los Angeles. Prabhupada would sometimes take a tour of the kitchen. Los Angeles was the world headquarters in 71, 72, 73, before India was going on. And Prabhupada went into the kitchen in LA. California, of course, the San Joaquin Valley, it's the home to so many, in those years, so many wonderful fruits and strawberries and oranges, and now it's almonds and this and that. But Prabhupada went into the kitchen and there was a colander, and the colander had these big red strawberries, big beautiful red strawberries in it. So Prabhupada was walking by, and usually there were the Matajis were in the kitchen. In those days we would say even the brahmacharinis, the unmarried young girls, they were in the kitchen. And Prabhupada walked up and he said, oh, what are these? And the girl said, they're strawberries, Prabhupada. And he said, oh, so he grabbed one and he started, and she said, oh, Prabhupada, it's boga. And Prabhupada laughed and he just popped it in his mouth. So that was Prabhupada. Everything we do is, all we can do is offer to our spiritual master. I know no other process. We can't, Prabhupada would tell us, you can't approach Krishna directly. We approach Krishna through the spiritual master. So we learned that very early on when we were in the temple, that everything is by the mercy of Srila Prabhupada. So everything we do, we offer to him. Any service we're able to do, it's only by his mercy. It's just by the mercy of Srila Prabhupada. This is his society. ISKCON is his society. His temples are his. And that will never change, regardless of who we take Diksha from. Prabhupada is our foremost Shiksha Guru. No one will debate that.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Thank you so much, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna. Well, let me see, do we have, I guess we could stop here this evening.
Yes, it's late for you
We'll
also.
if there are any other questions, I can answer them tomorrow. And yes, it's a government rule, Jai Shri Radha. Yes, it's government. We're not allowed in any temple. All the temples are closed other than the people living in the temple pujaris and whatever hands are in the temple. There's no going in and out of these places. In Vrindavan in particular, we've been locked down, and it just gets tighter and tighter. It's not going the other way. It's not getting looser. It's getting tighter as they find a few cases in Mathura, a few cases in Vrindavan. So today we heard the loudspeakers. We heard the policemen shouting something on the street. 9:30 in the morning. There's time where some people can go, you can go out to the pharmacy and do things, you can do this and that. But particularly us here in MVT, we're locked down. We have the sabji wallas and fruit wallas, they come up to the gate. We literally have our masks on, they have masks on, and they pass the fruit and veggies through the gate, and we pass our rupees through the gate. But at least we're getting these things. We haven't had any deficiency in fruit or vegetables, so we're actually feel very fortunate to be locked up by Krishna. He's locked us up in Vrindavan, so how can we complain to be locked up in Vrindavan? hopefully someday he'll lock us up here forever. Never let us leave. That's our goal. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
In case anyone wants to hear this class and there is a difficulty on Instagram, it's not our fault if you didn't hear, because Instagram been having a problems. We have a recording on the SrutaKirti Vishaka page on the Facebook.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Prabhu.
Thank you, Prabhus. Everyone, thank you for being here. You're all very inspiring. Very happy to be able to speak with you today, and we'll see you again tomorrow evening. We'll continue. I hardly said anything as far as I know about Calcutta, so
yes,
we have Calcutta, Mayapur. We'll speak more about tomorrow. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Okay. Hare Krishna. So thank you, devotees, so much for joining. I hope everybody's heart got nourished by hearing Prabhupada Katha from Prabhuji. It's so wonderful. So thank you so much. So we'll meet tomorrow morning for His Holiness Prithivardhan Maharaj's continuation of Harinam Chintamani. So Hare Krishna. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.